What happens when the mind games you play on others come back to haunt you? It's a question most of us never consider until it's too late. Dr. Evelyn Kane, an acclaimed psychologist with an unblemished reputation, was a master of the human mind. She had the power to bend people's thoughts, to shape their beliefs, to control their very actions. But when her life ended in a brutal, violent murder, the secret she left behind would reveal something very dark, something that would shatter everything we thought we knew about her, and about the people she left behind. Dr. Evelyn Kane wasn't just any psychologist. She was a pioneer, known for her groundbreaking work in the field of mind control and manipulation. She had built a career helping people unlock their deepest fears, guiding them through the darkest corners of their subconscious. To the outside world, she was a savior for those suffering from trauma, anxiety, and deep-rooted emotional pain. She lived a life most could only dream of: luxurious homes, expensive tastes, a successful career, and an almost flawless public image. She was beloved by her peers, adored by her patients, a picture-perfect life, or so it seemed. But there was a side to Evelyn Kane that no one saw. A side buried deep beneath the polished exterior. A side that, in the end, would cost her everything. Evelyn's brutal murder wasn't just the end of a life. It was the beginning of a chilling revelation, one that would expose a world of manipulation, deceit, and shocking secrets. Beneath the surface, Evelyn's life was far from perfect, and her murder would reveal a dark side no one could have imagined. Dr. Evelyn Kane's home was more than just a residence. It was a statement, a sprawling estate tucked away from the prying eyes of the world, nestled on the outskirts of the city. Inside, it was as pristine as the life she led, elegantly furnished, a sleek blend of modern luxury and old-world charm. Every inch of the house screamed sophistication, from the towering bookshelves in the study to the gleaming marble floors beneath her feet. It was the kind of home you'd expect a woman of her caliber to live in. But on the morning of her death, something felt off. The body of Dr. Evelyn Kane was found in her study, the room that had been the heart of her professional empire. Slumped over her desk, her head resting unnaturally against a pile of open books, her fingers still loosely gripping a half-empty cup of coffee, untouched for hours. At first glance, it seemed like the scene of an ordinary heart attack, or perhaps an accident. But there was something about it, the way her body was positioned, the stillness of the room, that felt wrong. Too clean, too staged. And then the real discovery. Investigators combed through her study, expecting to find little more than professional notes and case files. But what they found buried beneath her desk, hidden behind a false drawer, was something far more evil: a small, worn journal. The pages, yellowed with time, were filled with cryptic entries written in the meticulous hand of Dr. Kane herself. This wasn't just a diary. It was an account of her deepest, darkest secrets. Secrets she'd never intended for anyone to see. The first entry was harmless enough, detailing her latest success in therapy. But as they turned the pages, it became clear that this journal was more than just a record of a psychologist's work. It was a blueprint, a map to a mind darker than anyone could have ever imagined. As the investigators carefully read through the journal, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Dr. Evelyn Kane had been conducting psychological experiments, many of which were purely automatic. She could have written her own manuscript. Experiments on her patients, pushing ethical boundaries that would make even the most seasoned psychologist shudder. Under the guise of helping, she had manipulated minds in ways that went beyond traditional therapy. She'd written about techniques designed to break people, to strip them of their defenses, to control their very thoughts. Techniques that promised to heal, but only if you survived the emotional and mental destruction first. But it wasn't just her methods that raised alarms. It was the people she had been working with. Politicians, celebrities, wealthy businessmen, names that were not only recognizable but dangerous. These were the kinds of people who could make things disappear, who could cover up a mistake without batting an eye. They had everything to lose, and they were all under Dr. Kane's psychological influence. And then there were the patients who had disappeared. In the months leading up to Evelyn's death, several of her most influential clients had vanished without a trace, people who had been in the public eye one day and completely off the radar the next. No one questioned it. Until now. The journal made it clear there was something about these disappearances that was too perfectly timed to be mere coincidence. The investigation had only just begun, but already everything seemed connected. But the journal, that was only the beginning. As the investigators dug deeper into Evelyn's work and her mysterious death, they began to uncover layers of manipulation, betrayal, and dark psychology that stretched far beyond anything they could have anticipated. Who had she been playing? And more importantly, who had been playing her? The truth was more twisted than anyone had realized, and the deeper they dug, the more dangerous the answers became. Olivia Turner was the kind of assistant everyone would remember. Young, intelligent, and seemingly devoted to Dr. Evelyn Kane. On the surface, she was the perfect employee. She had been with Dr. Kane for over 2 years, working closely by her side in the well-organized chaos of the doctor's office. Quiet, efficient, and always present, Olivia had quickly earned the trust of her boss and had an almost intimate knowledge of Evelyn's life. But beneath that composed exterior, Olivia's life was anything but perfect. She had a history of horrible relationships, bouts of emotional instability, and a series of incidents in her past that no one cared to dig too deeply into. And now, with Dr. Kane dead, Olivia was thrust into the very center of the investigation. It was the first thing the detectives discovered. Olivia had been the last person to leave Dr. Kane's house that night. A neighbor had seen her car pull out of the driveway around 10:30 p.m., just hours before the murder was discovered. Her alibi was shaky at best, and when authorities searched her apartment, they found a few odd items. A set of notes detailing strange conversations she'd had with Dr. Kane, some of them referencing mysterious, high-profile clients, and even a few unsettling sketches of what appeared to be a mind control technique. As the investigation deepened, Olivia quickly became the prime suspect. She had been in Dr. Kane's orbit long enough to have witnessed the darker side of the doctor's work. Was she the one who'd finally snapped, unable to handle the psychological pressure any longer? The questioning started with Olivia sitting nervously in the interrogation room, her hands trembling, her eyes darting around as if seeking a way out. At first, she denied everything. She spoke about how much she had admired Dr. Kane, how she had once seen her as a mentor, as a lifeline. But as the questions kept coming, her demeanor began to shift. Then came the confession. "I didn't kill her," Olivia whispered, her voice shaky but resolute. "But I did tamper with evidence. I didn't want anyone to know what she was really doing, what we were really doing." Her admission stunned the room into silence. What was she talking about? Tampering with evidence? Was she trying to protect herself, or was she covering up something even more crazy? "I was just trying to break free," Olivia continued, her voice growing desperate. "She had me. She controlled me. I wasn't the victim. She was. She used me." The detectives exchanged confused glances. Was Olivia confessing to being part of something dark? Or was this just another desperate attempt to avoid responsibility? But then came the real bombshell. Olivia's eyes locked with the lead investigator, her voice low, almost haunted. "She wasn't just manipulating me. Dr. Kane was part of something much bigger. She had these people, powerful people, influential people, and she was controlling them, hypnotizing them, bending them to her will. They did things for her. They gave her things, but all she wanted was control. For a moment, the room was silent. No one knew what to make of Olivia's words. Powerful individuals? Hypnotism? Could this be another part of Dr. Kane's experiments? The twisted web of psychological manipulation she had created, expanding beyond just her patients? As the investigation into Dr. Evelyn Kane's death continued, it took a turn into the shadowy unknown. Leads started to surface, fragile at first, but soon they formed a pattern, a chilling revelation. Dr. Kane, the woman who had been seen as a brilliant psychologist, was not just a gifted mind expert. She was the leader of something much darker, a secret society. For decades, Evelyn had been the mastermind behind a network of powerful individuals, all bound together by her hypnotic grip. The society had remained hidden in the underbelly of influence. Through subtle hypnosis and psychological manipulation, Dr. Kane conditioned them, bending their wills to her desires. She would meet them for what appeared to be therapeutic sessions, promising healing, clarity, and control over their chaotic lives. But instead, she was the one pulling the strings, twisting their minds to serve her will. Evelyn's methods were nothing short of brilliant. She used behavioral conditioning to alter their choices, creating an unbreakable bond between her and her subjects. This society wasn't just about personal growth. Their goal, Evelyn's goal, was power. She used her knowledge of the human psyche to gain leverage over these figures, bending them to her desires and pushing them into unethical decisions that would keep them in debt to her, in more ways than one. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, one truth became clear. Dr. Kane had been at the helm of a vast, invisible empire, an empire built on manipulation and coercion. And the death of Dr. Kane was only the beginning of unraveling the full extent of the damage caused by her reign of psychological terror. In the days following Dr. Evelyn Kane's death, the investigation quickly turned to someone who had always remained just outside the public eye: her estranged husband, Richard Kane. A man whose name carried its own weight in the culinary world. Richard Kane was no stranger to luxury. His restaurants were famed for their exquisite dishes, and his reputation as a renowned chef was almost as carefully crafted as the meals he prepared. But behind the charming exterior lay a man with a past as dark as a horror story. Though separated for over a year, Richard never truly left Evelyn's orbit. They had their differences, yes, but there was a sense of something unresolved between them, a pull that neither could entirely escape. Richard continued to be a part of Evelyn's life, lingering in the background like a shadow, always near, always watching. The toxicologist's report was damning. Trace amounts of a potent poison had been found in Evelyn's system, evidence of a gradual, methodical attempt to end her life. And as the investigation honed in on those closest to Evelyn, one name stood out above the rest: Richard Kane, the estranged husband and the one person who had access to her food on a daily basis. With his background in the culinary arts, Richard was in a unique position. He prepared meals for Evelyn, worked with her food, and had the perfect opportunity to slip the poison into her dishes. But as investigators uncovered more, they were faced with a twist no one saw coming. Richard was not the cold, calculating murderer they had imagined. In a shocking confession, Richard claimed that he hadn't wanted to kill Evelyn. In fact, he argued, he had been manipulated. His mind twisted, his every move controlled by forces more powerful than he could ever have imagined. According to him, he had been a pawn, just like the rest of Evelyn's victims. "I didn't want this," Richard said, his voice trembling. "I didn't want to kill her, but they made me do it. They made me think it was the only way out. She controlled me, just like she controlled everyone else. I was trapped, just like all of them." Richard's claim that he had been manipulated into poisoning his wife raised even more questions. Was he telling the truth, or was he just trying to cover his own tracks? To answer this, investigators needed to dig deeper. Richard's confession was eerily similar to those made by other members of the secret society. Just as Olivia Turner, Dr. Kane's assistant, had claimed that she too was manipulated, Richard's story mirrored the psychological grip Evelyn had maintained on everyone around her. Each member of the society had been made to feel they had no way out, that their lives and careers were at the mercy of Evelyn's power. Could it be that Richard, like the others, had been a puppet in a much larger game, manipulated into committing the unthinkable? And if so, who else in Evelyn's twisted network had a hand in her death? And what was the real motive behind the murder? As the investigation continued, there was one figure whose role had remained on the periphery, a person no one had suspected, a teenager seemingly distant, rebellious, and disconnected from the chaos unfolding around her. Evelyn Kane's daughter, Emily. Emily had grown up in the shadow of her mother's genius, but more importantly, in the shadow of her mother's cruelty. She had seen it all, the manipulation, the control, the twisted games that Evelyn played with everyone around her. Emily wasn't just a passive observer. She had been an unwilling witness to her mother's psychological warfare. The way Evelyn had controlled not just her patients, but her own family, was a nightmare Emily couldn't escape. The relationship between mother and daughter was a fractured one. Evelyn had always seen Emily as a pawn, someone to mold into her image, to manipulate just as easily as she did with the powerful figures she worked with. Emily, however, was no fool. She saw through her mother's facade long before anyone else did. But as a child, what could she do? How could she fight back when the very person who should have been her protector was the source of her torment? For years, Emily had bided her time, silently absorbing the cruelty, learning the methods of control her mother had used on everyone around her. She had watched as Evelyn twisted Richard, her own father, into a broken man, forced to comply with her every whim. Emily had been the quiet observer, the one who saw the cracks in Evelyn's carefully constructed world and understood them for what they were. But now, as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, investigators uncovered a truth so shocking, it changed everything they thought they knew about Evelyn's death. Emily, the rebellious teenager who had always been seen as an innocent bystander, was not just another victim in her mother's game. No, Emily had orchestrated the entire murder. She had spent years plotting her mother's downfall, carefully studying Evelyn's methods, learning the psychological tactics that had made her mother so powerful. But Emily's revenge wasn't just about escape, it was about dismantling the very system of control that had kept her family in chains for so long. The first step in her plan was Olivia Turner. Emily framed the loyal assistant, planting misleading evidence that would lead investigators to believe Olivia was the killer. The journal, the manipulation, Olivia's confession, all of it was part of the trap Emily had set. She knew the detectives would see Olivia as the obvious suspect, a person with motive and a shaky past. Emily played her cards perfectly, ensuring that Olivia would bear the brunt of the blame. Then came Richard. Emily had always known her father's weaknesses, his loyalty to Evelyn, his fear, and his guilt. Using her knowledge of Evelyn's secret society, Emily manipulated Richard into thinking that his role in her mother's death was a necessary step in freeing himself from Evelyn's control. She played on his insecurities, his desperation to escape the chains Evelyn had wrapped around him. And Richard, like the puppet he had been for so long, fell right into Emily's hands. Emily knew how to exploit the fractures in their lives. She understood the psychology of guilt, fear, and loyalty better than anyone. But what made her truly dangerous was her ability to hide in plain sight. She was the daughter, innocent, silent, overlooked. No one suspected her, and that was her greatest advantage. But why go to such lengths? What had driven Emily to such extremes? The answer was simple. and chilling. Emily wasn't just seeking justice. She wasn't trying to merely escape the shadow of her mother's manipulations. What Emily wanted was control. She wanted to make sure the game that had ruled her life was finally, irrevocably over. For good. The final twist? Emily had always been in control. While Evelyn thought she was the mastermind, the puppet master pulling the strings, Emily had been playing her own game all along. Evelyn had made one fatal mistake. She underestimated her own daughter. And in the end, it was Emily who emerged victorious, taking back the power that had been stolen from her for so long. As the investigation came to its bitter end, with Emily's involvement now undeniable, one truth remained clear. Evelyn Kane, for all her brilliance, had never seen it coming. She had controlled so many, manipulated so many, but in the end, it was her own flesh and blood who brought her down. Emily wasn't just the victim of her mother's manipulations. She was the architect of her own redemption. A young woman who, in the darkest corners of her soul, had learned to play the game better than anyone else. As the dust settles and the full scope of Evelyn Kane's manipulations comes into focus, we are left to reflect on the true cost of a life built on control, not just for the victims, the rich, the powerful, the broken, but for the one who weaved it all together. Evelyn's dark genius didn't just ruin lives, it shaped them, twisted them, and left scars that no one could escape. Emily, once just a quiet, distant daughter, became the chilling symbol of what happens when manipulation goes unchecked. Her cold, calculated revenge was not just an act of justice, it was the devastating response of a woman who had been molded, shaped, and broken by her mother's psychological warfare. A woman who, in the end, didn't seek freedom, but retribution. It was a revenge decades in the making, and in that final act, Emily showed the world that no one, not even the person who thought she controlled everything, can escape the web they weave. What would you do if you were trapped in Evelyn Kane's mind games? Could you ever escape the grasp of someone who knew your every weakness, your every fear? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below. Let us know what you would do in Emily's shoes. If you're fascinated by the twists, turns, and dark secrets hidden in the shadows of the human mind, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories with shocking revelations.